All right, guys. Hope this finds you well. If you're watching this video, you're probably watching it from home. Um, let's get ready to roll. We're going to be talking about essentially the year 1770 up until 1776, the road to the revolution in your class notes today. So by the time we have gotten to where you're watching this, we've gone through our opening Zoom. We have spoken about some specific reasons why the colonists would have been so pissed off they just had to declare independence from Great Britain. Um, and we want to expand on several topics today, but from that list in particular, we want to expand on the Tea Act and the Intolerable Acts today. So let's get to it. Please, however it is that you take notes, let's do that now. We're going to start with the general theme of this conflict of ideas between what I've called this unique American experience or American spirit or unique American identity that was largely as a result of salutary neglect, where the colonists developed strong traditions of self government and American culture. Um, and they greatly resented this notion of taxation without representation. A large percentage of the colonists, in fact, felt like Great Britain had no right to tax them, or at least to tax them without representation. If you will recall, we talked about one such manifestation of that idea just post Stamp Act 1765, the Virginia House of Burgesses Virginia Resolves, which actually declared that Great Britain can't tax the colonists. So we know that in general, right, there's this rift that is growing between the colonists and the mother country. Um, a lot of it with respect to particular actions, facts, figures, and factors. But a lot of it also kind of this general idea, this widening gap in culture and a sense of traditions between the new colonies and the old mother country. And then we get to some more particulars in this time period we're examining today, 1770 to 1776. And we're going to talk, as I said earlier, about the Tea Act of 1773. And I think we'd already mentioned, right, that the British East India Tea Company is essentially a British government monopoly selling tea in the American colonies. Um, they would therefore be able to undersell American merchants and essentially mandate mercantilism, that the colonies would make the mother nation wealthy. We talked about how the colonists would respond to that oftentimes through boycotts or other protests, economic alternatives. This is how, remember, we became a Starbucks or a Dunkies nation. Um, we have organizations form like the Sons of Liberty, or how about the Daughters of Liberty, where women are becoming more involved? Remember, one of the general effects of post French and Indian War is that there's an increased not only awareness but activism in a lot of the colonists. And so it's common for your average citizen to at least have an understanding and an opinion of what's happening politically. Um, when we talk about organizations like the Sons of Liberty, and we had seen an image of the tarring and feathering of the tax agents and that sort of thing, there are documented instances of violence perpetuated against the throne, the crown, okay, the redcoats, the lobsters, coming from organizations like the Sons of Liberty or others, whether it be in Philadelphia, New York, Charleston. The Sons of Liberty, of course, are out of Boston, and there it gets particularly precarious. And so we go to this famous event known as the Boston Tea Party, that is a direct response to the Tea Act of 1773. Um, and uh, and that, of course, is where the colonists dress as Native Americans and they board ships in the Boston harbor and they throw the tea into the harbor, and it's this massive protest. It's not necessarily as even innocent as that sounds, and we could show you some clips as it's portrayed um, in either episode 1 or episode 2 coming up of John Adams when we get there. What's notable about the Boston Tea Party, again, isn't necessarily the event itself, okay, but the cause and effect. So we've got the Tea Act, we've got the Boston Tea Party, and then we've got the coercive acts, all right, and that's the net effect that is extremely significant for this road to American independence that we're getting to. Um, in British terms, it is known as the coercive acts, of course, meant to force, once again, uh, compliance from the colonists. Okay, they are going to literally coerce the colonists into abiding by the British rules and regulations and policies and procedures, and they are going to coerce these uppity Americans into compliance. By the vantage point of the colonists, the coercive acts are known as the intolerable acts. They do a number of things. We're going to see a video here on the Boston Tea Party, and then we're going to talk more about the result of the Boston Tea Party when we get back to the coercive acts. Okay. This video is linked for you. It's a couple minutes long. Check it out, and then let's get back to notes. So take a break from the notes, watch the clip, and then let's get back to notes. Okay. So those intolerable acts, or the coercive acts, if you're British, if you're wearing red today, spring up, as I said, as a direct result to the Boston Tea Party, which, of course, was a direct result of the Tea Act of 1773. Well, what do the intolerable acts do? Well, we say here they reduce self-government, allow for the quartering of troops, and so on and so forth. Let's get a little bit more particular than that, okay? The coercive acts include the Boston Port Bill, which fines Boston for the tea destroyed in the Boston Tea Party and closes the harbor until the fines are paid. Now, imagine what that does economically to sailors and merchants and port workers and all. They're out of jobs, out of money, out of goods to sell, goods that might already be bought and paid for. And so this is it creates an absolutely untenable economic situation in Boston. The government bill on the previous side, I said, reduces self government. So the particular I want to get to with respect to that claim is the government bill and, in fact, the administration of justice bill. The government bill essentially rewrites the Massachusetts colonies charter and gives vast permissions and authorities to the royal governor, expands essentially the throne's power, or, if the royal governor represents the throne, his representative's power. That is top down tyrannical rule, if you're a colonist, okay, is imposed upon the colony, along with the Administration of Justice Act, which removes trials from the colony of Massachusetts. Now, I had gone through previously how a lot of the actions perpetuated by the British during this time period, essentially as early as 1754 and up until 1776, follows like this logical progression when you match up uh, the particulars of what pissed off the colonists so much to eventually skipping ahead to like 1789 when now the United States has a Bill of Rights. I want you to pay attention to the Administration of Justice Act in the same vein. The Administration of Justice Act, as I said, reduces self-government by removing trials from the Massachusetts colony. But what it then does is send trials back to London. So if you are a British officer, perhaps facing trial, you're going to go back to Great Britain, where the opinion of you is probably in higher regard than the opinion of an uppity American colonists in front of a jury of your peers. But if you're a colonist and you're looked at in a negative light, you're no longer being tried by a jury of your peers. You're being tried back in London where you are not viewed very well. So when we get to the criminal law procedures that are laid out in the Bill of Rights, which would include the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and even the Eighth Amendment. One of those rights, of course, it's actually seen in both the Sixth and the Seventh Amendment, speaks to the right of a trial by jury of your peers. Okay. Um, so there's another kind of major piece here of the Intolerable Acts that is incredibly relevant, even lasting in American legal culture today. And we had already talked about the Quartering Act. So here's another instance of the Quartering Act. And you can imagine how that would continue to piss off the colonial soldiers. No need to write the phrase pissed off in your SAQs, okay? But you know where I'm trying to go. Um, I think there are some historians who would even offer up that with respect to quartering, it's not just, hey, let me crash on your couch, that there were instances of violence and sexual violence perpetuated upon colonists from the hands of quartered soldiers. So things are really getting heated, and not only the rhetoric, but also the violence is ramping up. It would seem this gulf that we've been talking about, this widening divide, is truly getting towards an untenable position more and more. Here you see a political cartoon depicting the Intolerable Acts. You can see here it is the Reform Port Bill here. What you actually see here are known members of Parliament holding down, as the caption says, kind of an allegorical figure, holding down America, as it were, and forcing tea down their throat. Um, and so you see uh, productions like this or reproductions like this. You see that there's this general kind of uh, zeitgeist that continues to infiltrate all of the colonies and the spirit of many of the colonists with respect to how they view this quote unquote tyrannical British rule. And so we come to what we will call the First Continental Congress. At the time, it was just called the Continental Congress, but we're going to have two of them. Um, I would argue, as I say here on the slide, that one of the most significant results of the coercive acts or the intolerable acts is just that the colonists came together to view them in a unified fashion as intolerable. That the way the British continued to institute and employ tyranny, um, violence, unreasonable rule over the colonists only serves to deepen that unique American identity, that nothing binds like a common enemy, right? Um, where the colonists are unified in their resentment against Great Britain. Not entirely, of course, and we know there's really no absolutes in history. You know, we're going to talk about the Patriots versus the Loyalists. Howard Zinn will talk about how it wasn't universal, it depended upon class and so on and so forth. But the general spirit here, the general gist is that as Great Britain increased its oppressive rule, if you don't like the word tyrannical, that the colonists were, in large part at least, okay, becoming united against British rule. Um, What's notable about the First Continental Congress, as I said earlier, is it is not a declaration of independence. Nobody goes there immediately. I think there are certainly some radicals, if you will, among the Sons of Liberty. Sam Adams, for instance, who you see him portrayed in the John Adams film, who are probably more thirsty for separation and even if by violent means than others are. But in large part, the colonists kind of were seeking an opportunity to just have their problems addressed, to have representation in Parliament, for instance, or as the phrase highlighted here is, to have a redress of their grievances, to say to the crown, hey, this is what's bothering us. This is, with specific terms, right? And we just went over that list at the beginning of the class. These are the things that are making us so pissed off. And what can we do? How can we reconcile? Okay, these differences. Um, so, an association form called the association, and they take some measures into their hands while they wait to see what the British response will be, and they aim for further boycott of British goods. And yes, they know that in kind of speaking to the crown this way, that they could bring violence unto themselves. So they kind of prepare themselves that there could be military ramifications here. There could be violence perpetuated unto them. And so they wait to see how King George will respond. Spoiler alert, not well. Um, but while they wait, importantly, they agree to meet again. So the First Continental Congress kind of puts this redress of grievances out there, and then they say, well, let's see what happens with it. Okay. The association includes famous, what we will call patriots, men like John Adams, Patrick Henry, the little bit more hot headed Sam Adams, John Hancock. And these are the patriots now that are kind of in leadership positions among the disaffected colonists and even some of the radicals. And they're the ones waiting to see what King George has to say about their redress of grievances that comes out of the First Continental Congress. What I would like you to do right now, taking a break from notes, is to explore this notion of how the colonies might come together in response to increased British uh, oppression or tyranny. And so, what I would like you to read is linked here on this slide. It is Connecticut decries the Boston Port Act. This comes from our American Spirit reading. You've got a link here. Um, Live, we're going to be discussing this after we read it in class. Okay. The questions being, what particularly charged language of an emotional nature, perhaps hyperbolic, can you find in this reading? And what do you think this reading suggests about the response of other colonies to the actions and events taking place in Boston? Do you think it's universal? Why or why not? Is it up and down that eastern seaboard, or is it just restricted to the general New England area? What do you think? What do you say? If you're reading this at home, well, you're on your own, so try to conduct this type of analysis. You should, live or at home, understand how we analyze primary sources when we go about this, right? What is the historical context? Whom is the intended audience? What is the purpose? What is the point of view? Why is this important? And what say ye about the questions that I've laid out before you here? So again, we're kind of in a break from notes. You're reading Connecticut Decries the Boston Port Act, and you are either conducting your own analysis or discussing small group analysis on this document and the questions listed here. Let's take a break from notes and do that now. Okay. I think you will see that there is some mixed reaction among the colonies. Um, Maybe not universal. Um, Again, I think some historians, like a Howard Zinn, would argue that it was less than universal. But I think it is generally also an historically accurate take to make the claim that colonists, throughout large portions at least of the American colonies, were incensed, if not enraged, by the British actions as it relates to the Intolerable Acts, and that it was, in fact, to at least some level of significant degree, a unifying factor. I had mentioned some of the Gilder Lehrman readings that might do this for you. So we have the one you just looked at from the American Spirit. Connecticut decries the Boston Port Act. Here in Gilder Lehrman, remember, we have a report on the reaction to the Stamp Act 1765. I had pointed some of these resources out to you the other day. I'm doing it again now because I think it's important that you have a willingness to examine some of these resources to really help your understanding, your content, as well as your analysis skills. So I invite you to please check that out. I'm not going to make that mandatory now, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, check this out. All right. Back to some class notes here. Okay. And we're moving along thematically, we're moving along chronologically. We're going to get up towards the Revolutionary War. So we left off our notes talking about the First Continental Congress. Now we're going to get into, I would say, kind of some instances that would serve to be uh, some of the proverbial straws that break the camel's back and lead to the beginning of colonial mobilization for a revolutionary war. Lexington and Concord among them most famously. So remember that after the First Continental Congress, not only were the revolutionary leaders kind of in a wait and see game to see what King George says about their redress of grievances, but they also said that they've got to prepare for the fact that King George's reaction will be swift and will be violent. And so colonial militias begin to make preparations for a possible fight. The British become aware of this, and one of the famous British generals, General Gage, has distinct orders to arrest two rabble rousers in particular, Sons of Liberty, both Sam Adams and John Hancock. Gage also learns that the colonists have a large depot of gunpowder and some other supplies in preparation for military conflict stored in the town of Concord, Massachusetts. And so he sends his redcoats out of Boston to ride west and to capture this supply while also arresting both Hancock and Sam Adams. The British take off in the middle of the night. And here we get to Paul Revere's famous ride, although there are a couple other players involved. There's William Dawes, and after Revere gets captured, actually, Samuel Prescott, another Patriot, finishes his ride. They literally, as kind of history portrays it, they're riding out through these villages. We've talked about these New England villages, right? Kind of centered around a town green. You have a church and a town hall and a town green, and the village lives kind of nearby. It's communal living, if you will, or at least community living, to be perhaps more precise. And Revere is riding through, warning the British are coming. The British are coming. So successfully, uh, Revere and then Prescott spread that message. And so when the British troops arrive in Lexington, which is just east of Concord, several dozen militiamen await. There's a standoff. I don't think really the Redcoats nor the Patriots, the colonists, the colonial militia, is really itching for an actual fight at this point. There's some trepidation. Despite everything that's occurred so far, you know, full on battle is heating things up to the next degree uh, for both sides. And so there's kind of this silent standoff. And to this day, nobody knows who fired the first shot, but the first shot was fired. Several Minutemen, as they were called, I said, right? Patriots or colonists or the colonial militia. Um, the colonial militiamen are called Minutemen. I think that's probably a term, even though I don't have it highlighted here. You want to get into your notes, okay? Uh, why? Because they can be ready at the minute. The militia is ready to be called upon. And those that were called upon and responded and rode out to Lexington and formed this militia after the standoff and this mystery shot, several of them are killed. Um, and the British, they've done their business and they move on. They move on towards Concord and the depot that we've discussed. That shot, though, this battle is known as famously April 19, 1775. So keep in mind now, spoiler alert, July 4, 1776 is the Declaration of Independence. So we are what, a good like 15 months prior to that, with the shot heard round the world. Um, the colonists had known, of course, that the British were making a ride to Concord, and they actually removed most of the gunpowder from their depot. So the British get there, it's empty, and they start to return back to Boston, mostly empty handed. There, militia are waiting for them in the woods, hiding behind trees and rocks. And this kind of asymmetrical guerrilla warfare by this ragtag Minutemen militia um, scores a victory by slaughtering several redcoats in the woods as they returned from Concord to Boston. So here you see kind of what this looks like, right? The British forces you see are on the Black Path here from Boston. My face is covering up Boston right now. Um, and they get to Lexington. There's the Lexington Green, right? And we talked about how that town would look like in New England several times. Um, and here's that battle, right? Uh, they move on towards Concord alongside, if you will. All right, Paul Revere, kind of ahead of them, warning the colonists, the British are coming, the British are coming. Revere gets captured here, and Samuel Prescott completes his ride. Um, they get to the depot, it's empty. They are returning uh, back towards Boston, and there we have this incident where the colonists score a victory. Um, I point this arrow out over here just to show you when I have showed you these typical New England towns. On this map, this arrow here would indicate roughly about the town of Harvard, Massachusetts, where I happened to get married and showed you guys, right? If you'll recall what that town green would look like. So there is the story, guys, of famously Lexington and Concord and the shot heard round the world. So we're going to get ourselves towards now the Second Continental Congress. It's become clear how King George responded to the redress of grievances. Not well. He orders Hancock and Adams to be arrested and for the Concord Depot to be taken over. King George is not listening to any redress of grievances. And that is really a key factor here, because we've got to ask ourselves the question, what would happen if King George didn't act that way? What would happen if King George said, okay, we're going to give you this right and this right. We're going to repeal this act and this act, and we're going to give you representation in Parliament. Who knows, right? Because it didn't happen. What did happen is King George refused, and he brought the big guns. He brought the fire, and we have kind of at this point, it's almost like this is the beginning of the Revolutionary War. It is very clear to the colonists that the crown is not going to listen. And so this notion of remaining British for many colonists is going to begin to change. They're thinking, at least certainly the radicals, the Sons of Liberty, many of the leaders, Sam, if not necessarily yet John Adams. John Adams, of course, is getting brought along. They're thinking less about redressing their grievances and more about what an untenable situation this is, and perhaps independence is going to become the answer. Fast forwarding from April 75, Lexington and Concord, to June 75, we have another kind of battle that would be considered an early one again in this Revolutionary War, the Battle of Bunker Hill, which actually is fought on a place called Breed's Hill. And that is actually just outside of Boston. The name of the city is slipping me right now, but we're in that same general vicinity, right? And what happens here is that much like the guerrillas scored a victory on the Boston retreat from Concord, uh, the American militia, the Minutemen, score a victory in the Battle of Bunker Hill once again. Now, mind you, this is against the most powerful army to date that world history has ever witnessed. And we have a ragtag bunch of militiamen engaging in guerrilla warfare and scoring not one, but two victories. And so, in addition to feeling like, hey, maybe independence is in fact the way to go, I think the colonists also think we can do this. Remember, we, right, had won the French and Indian War, and now we scored two major victories, at least in our eyes, against this great British army. So philosophically, independence is making more sense. And even from a more pragmatic standpoint, independence might be making more sense. In fact, one of the famous readings of the day is Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, published now January 1776, where Paine argues, hey, look at this buildup. Look at this list that we've been building in class of what's pissed us off so much. And now look at how many times the British have responded with violence going back to 1770 with the Boston Massacre, going forward with the Intolerable Acts, getting into what the British attempted to do with Lexington and Concord, and being willing again to go to battle with their very own citizens at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so common sense is Thomas Paine's very simple argument that it is, in fact, common sense. It only makes sense that the American colonies declare independence from Great Britain. And that is, with no pun intended towards the Liberty Bell, that is a bell that cannot be unrung, right? Um, Now, again, some of the colonists probably still need to be brought along, but common sense is going to help them be brought along. This is essentially a pamphlet that gets distributed throughout the colonies, makes this argument, and a lot of colonists, their attitude begins to change. Now, again, we're talking January 1776 here. Uh, we're not yet at where we actually declare independence. Again, those colonists might be brought along slowly and some not at all. And so the Second Continental Congress, remember they had agreed to meet again, uh, goes one more time to King George with what we call the olive branch petition. Right now, the olive branch is a uh, very recognizable common symbol for peace, or an extension to kind of make amends, right? So we say, well, I got in an argument with my wife, and I tried to apologize and extend the olive branch. Okay, so it denotes a willingness to make amends, try to pat things up real nice, and see if this relationship can be repaired. Um, so they try one more time, the Second Continental Congress, with the olive branch petition. Spoiler alert, King George still ain't having it. So the Continental Congress notes that and adopts a resolution July 2, 1776, to dissolve ties between the colonies and Great Britain. All right. And so 2 days later, July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence is approved by the Continental Congress. Um, it's not all said and done. Obviously, there's going to be a war to be fought, and not all colonists are, in fact, on board. Some make some emotional arguments. Some make some more pragmatic arguments about how it would make sense to stay with the British, the largest empire in the world, despite the fact that the colonists may have enjoyed a couple victories, the most kick ass military in the world. And the Patriots don't want to hear that. The Loyalists don't want to hear about common sense. So there is a little bit of an internal debate, right, in the American colonies about the Patriots and the Loyalists, and um, kind of some back and forth, some debate, if you will, right, about what makes sense. But as soon as uh, the Declaration is passed, that's all King George needs. And British forces invade New York almost instantaneously. And the Revolutionary War has truly begun in the immediate wake of the Declaration of Independence. To close class today, and to prepare for our next class, where we're going to get into common sense. We're going to get into the Patriots versus the Loyalists. We are going to get into some John Adams. We're going to get into some Howard Zinn, all kind of moving forward. Uh, I want you to prepare for that class by reading this hyperlink here. This is Thomas Paine's Common Sense as presented in our American Spirit textbook. So your homework is to please read Thomas Paine Talks American Sense. We don't have to do that in groups. You're going to read that individually. When we get together in class next, we are going to be in groups and we are going to discuss your reading and analysis of Common Sense. So, what I want you to do as your homework is to read, analyze, and prepare to discuss what is the crux of Thomas Paine's argument. What is the British point of view? Is Thomas Paine using, as he claims, common sense, or is it merely raw passion with which he speaks? Can you identify some holes in Thomas Paine's argument? Can you conduct a hippy happy analysis on this? Please do this reading, do this analysis, take notes, complete these objectives you see on your screen right now. I'm not collecting anything here. The proof is going to be in the pudding when we talk about it as a class next class. Okay, so that is your homework. Thomas Paine Talks Common Sense. It's hyperlinked right here for you. Um, and that's all I got for you today. When we get back to our next class, we're going to open up with this, as I just said. And we're going to get into some other things, including, as I said, Patriots versus Loyalists. And then we're going to get into John Adams, episode 2. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I got for you today. I hope you got some good notes. I hope you got some good specific with respect to our content, and that this serves you well as we continue to try serve our skill objectives. I look forward to seeing you in our next class. Thanks, guys.